Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and today's video is going to be a fun one. In today's video, I got tired of facing level 50 ZYGARDEs in the Open Master League, so I had to bring out my level 50 TAPU BULU to absolutely destroy them. TAPU BULU is a grass and fairy type Pokemon with the moveset of Bullet Seed, Grass Knot, and Dazzling Gleam. TAPU BULU does not see a lot of meta play, but it can either single or double resist every move in ZYGARDE's standard moveset, rendering it absolutely helpless. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches. Hopping into the first match, picking up a positive lead, Rhyperior into Solgaleo. Opponent safe switches into ZYGARDE, and our target has been acquired as in comes TAPU BULU. The opponent can go for a crunch, they can go for an earthquake, whatever they throw, it's not going to be doing anything to the TAPU BULU. TAPU BULU going for the super effective Dazzling Gleam, big damage onto the ZYGARDE. ZYGARDE continuing to farm, they're firing off another charge move, it's going to be another crunch, and again, they do not get the debuff. Honestly, I was pretty sure that a Grass Knot would not knock out here, as ZYGARDE is just absurdly tanky. So I go for the Dazzling Gleam, and I'm able to pick up the KO. Opponent is going to send in the Solgaleo. Solgaleo is going to get a massive farm, and this makes things a bit uncomfortable. I go for the Dazzling Gleam. I don't want to take an Iron Head on my Rhyperior, so instead, I'm just going to be sending in the Giratina, as Giratina can better tank the energy here. They're firing off a move. That's perfectly fine. I'm going to let this through. It is going to be the Psychic Fangs in the back. It's Hisuian Avalugg, and this is a problem. Hisuian Avalugg can hit this entire team for super effective damage, and was honestly a pretty big oversight when it came to team building. I build up past the Rock Wrecker, baiting with the Breaking Swipe, hoping for the debuff. I get the shield, but I do not get the debuff. I need this debuff. I'm going for another Breaking Swipe. Opponent lets it go, and I go 0 for 2 on debuffs. You've got to be kidding me, Rhyperior. They go for another Icy Wind. I use my final shield. I'm able to make it to one final Breaking Swipe, just needing to get damage and a debuff onto my opponent. I do finally get the debuff at the perfect time. This will allow me to survive the Icy Wind. We simultaneously switch Giratina into the Solgaleo. Solgaleo firing off Psychic Fangs, so it looks like the Solgaleo may potentially not be running Iron Head. I'm going for the Ominous Wind here. Ominous Wind will still hit for super effective damage and fish for a boost. Unfortunately, the boost is not to be, but I'm able to make it to another Ominous Wind. Is this going to be enough to knock out? Yes, it is. In comes the Avalugg, but the Avalugg runs out of HP, and we take that game. Picking up an amazing lead in the next match, leading Rhyperior into Ho-Oh, and the Ho-Oh is staying in this matchup. Typically, that means there's probably going to be a Dialga being brought in here. I decided to preserve some HP and just under-tap the Breaking Swipe, but that's not a Dialga, that's a ZYGARDE. I'm going to look to rebank energy on the Rhyperior, because guess what? They can't do anything against the TAPU BULU. Let's go. ZYGARDE, the absolute menace of the Master League, rendered completely helpless by this weird Grass Fairy Pokemon. I'm firing off the Dazzling Gleam. Dazzling Gleam connects. That does massive damage to the ZYGARDE. ZYGARDE continuing to farm. I'm going to let this through. My opponent can go for the Earthquake, but it will not be enough to KO. But their switch timer is up. In comes Ho-Oh. I'm able to make it to the Dazzling Gleam, but this is still resisted. And now Ho-Oh has taken some pretty sizable damage. I'm going to send in Giratina here. Giratina able to farm up and make it to the Shadow Ball, putting pressure on the shield from the opponent. They're actually going to let this go. They let the Ho-Oh go. They still have the ZYGARDE lurking in the back. What is that final Pokemon? They send in the ZYGARDE. ZYGARDE, it's not going to make it to a move. In the back, it's Kyurem, and I am not baiting. I'm going straight for the Shadow Ball. The Shadow Ball connects. Opponent tried to call a bait. Back in comes Rhyperior. Rhyperior going to start spamming out these Breaking Swipes. This is actually a Steel Wing Kyurem, and that is substantially worse for me. A Steel Wing, of course, is hitting the Rhyperior for super effective damage, and they get to the Glaciates a lot faster. I would love a debuff. Breaking Swipe gets the shield. I do get the debuff. I'm farming up, but I think I'm running out of options here. Kyurem, Glaciate is going to pick up the knockout. In comes the Giratina. Giratina, can it make it to a move? No, it cannot. The Kyurem gets KO'd, and that's a good game. Picking up a tricky lead in the next match, Rhyperior into Xerneas. I am able to tank one move here. Typically, when I played out this lead previously, my opponents would always shield the Rock Wrecker, so I decided to go for the bait. And of course, this is the one time they don't shield. Oh my goodness, that is extremely unfortunate. They go for the close combat, and they're going for close combat number 2. I am going to be shielding this move up. Opponent is going to look to save switch out of here, and they do into Dialga. Dialga, not good news for my backline. I'm going to be forced to stay in here with the Rhyperior, go for the Breaking Swipe, but unfortunately, the luck is not with me. I do not get the debuff. I'm going for another Breaking Swipe. Opponent is going to commit the shield, and there it is. We do finally get access to that debuff. I'm firing off the Ominous Wind. Ominous Wind will not get the knockout here, but it will get Dialga low. And on top of that, I get the boost as well. A boosted Giratina seems valuable, so I am going to be committing the shield here. And now I can potentially grab the shield back from the Xerneas. In the back, who else but ZYGARDE? I'm firing off a boosted Shadow Ball into the ZYGARDE, and ZYGARDE still tanks that surprisingly well, even though that is boosted damage. They're going for the Crunch. Crunch is not going to be enough to KO. ZYGARDE has very, very limited damage output. With a fraction of HP left, I make it to one final Shadow Ball. Please shield this. They do. They're hoping their energy on the ZYGARDE will be useful, but bad news for the ZYGARDE. In comes TAPU BULU. They send in the Xerneas. I probably could have gone for a Grass Knot to pick up the knockout here, but I'm looking to show some dominance. I land the Dazzling Gleam. In comes the ZYGARDE, and it does not matter what they throw. Crunch, Earthquake, TAPU BULU does not care. TAPU BULU farming up to 100, playing to the charge attack priority tie. Dazzling Gleam gets the knockout, and that's a good game. There's trouble brewing in the next match as I lead Rhyperior into Palkia. Palkia is a pretty big core breaker for this team unless it's aligned against the TAPU BULU. I'm going to stay in with the Rhyperior, do some nice chip damage, or grab a shield with Breaking Swipe. Breaking Swipe gets a shield and a debuff. I'm now going to switch into my Giratina. Opponent fires off energy with Palkia, but to me that felt a little bit early. So I am going to let that through. It is just going to be the Aqua Tail, and now I'm going to be firing off the Shadow Ball. Shadow Ball will do quite a lot of damage, so the opponent is actually going to expend the final shield. I do survive an Aqua Tail here, so I am going to let this through. Opponent, Aqua Tail, that is not going to do a whole lot. They're going for another Aqua Tail. I do want to win switch advantage here, so I am going to expend one shield. They're not switching out, so I'm going for the Shadow Ball right away, and this is going to pick up the knockout onto the Palkia. And now I have switch advantage, which is good because Rhyperior and TAPU BULU form a core, but a very alignment-dependent core. They send in Melmetal, and I am so happy that I have switch advantage because I can align this onto Rhyperior. Rhyperior continuing to farm. They're going for a superpower here and probably a dip, so I am going to be shielding up. In the back, it's Kyogre. There's a little bit of stutter. Come on, game. In comes the TAPU BULU. I'm farming up and going for the Grass Knot. This will hit for massive super effective damage, nearly getting the one-shot. Kyogre unable to make the Blizzard. Opponent sees the writing on the wall and concedes the match. We see a familiar lead in the next match, Rhyperior into Ho-Oh. Very good spot to be in as the Rhyperior, but the fact that the opponent is staying in here does mean that they're probably weak to Rhyperior somewhere in the back. The Brave Bird connects. We do see the immediate save switch into the Dialga after the Brave Bird lands. And honestly, I do wish that I had shielded the Rhyperior, as honestly now, health on the Rhyperior does become a bit of an issue. I'm just going to keep spamming out these Breaking Swipes. Opponent is going to go for the Iron Head just before I make my next Breaking Swipe. I really need switch advantage, so I will go down a shield in exchange for getting farm down and being able to dictate switch, because I cannot let my TAPU BULU get absolutely cooked by Ho-Oh. In comes the Ho-Oh. I'm going for the Rock Wrecker. Only getting to one move here. The Rock Wrecker does get respected. Opponent does lead with energy, but I have switch advantage. And Giratina is able to tank a Brave Bird. They're going for another Brave Bird. They're getting a lot of mileage out of this Ho-Oh as the Brave Bird connects in the back. It is Xerneas. Xerneas is going to be able to connect with a massive neutral Moonblast, but the important thing here is they have almost zero fast move pressure. So even though that Moonblast absolutely shreds through the TAPU BULU's HP, TAPU BULU is not in a position where the opponent can farm down. The opponent is now going to be hit with a second Grass Knot, and the question is, are they going to shield the Xerneas? No, they're saving shields for the Ho-Oh. Ho-Oh gets the farm down, but I have energy on the Giratina. I'm farming up a ton of energy at this point. The only lose con that I see is to go for a bait. So I'm going to full send the Shadow Ball. Opponent calls the bait, and I think that should be winning. I'm going to commit the shield. They're going to go for the Sacred Fire. Do they get the debuff? Yes, they do, but the Shadow Claws still barely get the KO. We're met with a terrible lead in the next match. Rhyperior into Groudon. I'm going to immediately save switch into Giratina. My opponent is now going to respond with Dialga. Definitely not a great start to this match. I'm going to be firing off the Shadow Ball. Shadow Ball is going to be no-shielded by my opponent. I continue to farm up with the Giratina. Giratina able to make the Ominous Wind. So potentially I could make a play for swap here. The Ominous Wind will grab a shield from the opponent. I don't get to make a play for switch, but I do leave with a shield advantage. And my opponent is only going to make it to one move here. They're going to fire off their energy. They go for the Iron Head. Rhyperior is a bulky beast, able to withstand that damage. And it's a Zekrom in the back. This game is winnable despite the terrible lead in swap. Breaking Swipe will connect. In comes the Groudon, and I send in the Tapu Bulu. If I manage my energy well, this is just a win. They are going to be firing off a lot of fire punches here. I know I can tank one, so I am going to let one through. I continue to farm. I can go one in the move safely, but I believe I should be able to go for 2 Bullet Seeds and the move. But disaster strikes. I was off on my counts. It's a CMP tie, and that's probably a game-losing misplay by me. That is so unfortunate. Grassdon is going to pick up the KO. In comes the Zekrom. I'm farming up. My only hope is that they try and call the bait. The Dazzling Gleam gets shielded by the Zekrom. I switch in the Rhyperior, but I do not make it to the Breaking Swipe, and we lose a heartbreaking game. Hopping into the next match, leading Rhyperior into ZYGARDE. So this team wants to see ZYGARDE, but not on the lead. So I'm forced to stay in here with the Rhyperior and go for the Breaking Swipe. It's a 50-50 chance of getting an attack drop. Breaking Swipe connects. I do not get the attack drop. That's very unfortunate. My opponent has farmed up quite a lot of energy here. I decide to respect the Earthquake. It's the Crunch bait, and my opponent gets the 30% chance at the defense drop. So some very unfortunate RNG to start off this match. I go for another Breaking Swipe. Again, I am unsuccessful in my search for an attack drop. They go for another Crunch. And at this point, I'm down 2 shields. I'm in such an atrociously bad position. I fire off the Breaking Swipe. That's going to be no-shielded. Opponent is going to save switch into their own Rhyperior. But guess what, Rhyperior? This is double super effective damage from the Tapu Bulu. They can go for the Rock Wrecker. Rock Wrecker is a very powerful move that does massive damage, but I'm able to withstand that damage and farm up to the back-to-back Grass Knots. Grass Knot number 1. Does Rhyperior decide to shield? No, they let it through. In the back, opponent has Solgaleo, and despite how terribly this game started, this actually looks winnable because I have switch advantage. I have the Giratina aligned onto the Solgaleo. Solgaleo is going to be firing off their energy, and this is just going to be a Psychic Fangs. They do need to land multiple moves to try and win this game. An Iron Head after I get debuffed would be problematic. I go for the Ominous Wind. I get the shield. I'm farming up. I switch into Rhyperior, and I get the catch. Is it the Iron Head? It is. That's a massive catch. They undercharge, but that allows me to get an extra Mud Slap of damage. Back in comes the Giratina, going for the Ominous Wind. Opponent will have to expend their final shield here. I continue to farm up. Opponent makes it to a move. Is it the Iron Head or is it the Psychic Fangs? It is the Iron Head. That's going to get me low. In comes the ZYGARDE, but I have the Ominous Wind ready. This Ominous Wind will pick up the knockout onto the ZYGARDE, and despite really tough alignment in that game, we're able to take the win. Moving into the next match, going up against fellow content creator Jonkus, and we have a very tough lead, Rhyperior into Groudon. I save switch into the Giratina, and the opponent responds with Dialga. So very tough alignment on the lead and swap. But the good news is not only do I bait out the Dialga, but I grab an early shield advantage as well. Looks like my opponent is content to go for the full farm down here. They're going to exit with a massive amount of energy, but Rhyperior has a big stat product, so Rhyperior can tank any one move. So I'm going to be waiting my timer and then sending in the Rhyperior, basically just to be used as a meat shield, and hopefully Tapu Bulu can do well in the back. My opponent goes for the Iron Head. Do they make a second? They do not. In comes the Groudon. I send in the Tapu Bulu. In the back, it's Palkia. And at this point, I'm in a winning position. Tapu Bulu up a shield can close out this game. I go for the Dazzling Gleam. No baits here. Dazzling Gleam is shielded up by the Palkia. Palkia has farmed enough for the Fire Blast. You know what? If he's running Fire Blast, he deserves the win. It is the Fire Blast. Respect for the spicy nuke move. And that's game over. Hopping into the final match, picking up a good lead Rhyperior into Dialga. Opponent save switches into a Kyogre, and they're about to regret that decision as in comes Tapu Bulu. Tapu Bulu firing off the Grass Knot, looking for the KO. Opponent is going to commit a shield, so they're looking to make a play for switch advantage. I don't really want to tank an Origin Pulse as Tapu Bulu doesn't have the greatest bulk ever, but it is just going to be a Surf, and I'm going to be firing off another Grass Knot. Grass Knot is going to be shielded up by my opponent. I continue to farm. They're going for another charge move, and I'm fine with letting this Surf through. Surf not going to be enough to KO. Tapu Bulu makes it to the Grass Knot, not only winning me switch advantage, but I have a 1-0 shield advantage as well. The Grass Knot picks up the knockout. In comes Dialga. Dialga does get a pretty healthy energy advantage. I send in the Rhyperior. Rhyperior continuing to farm. Dialga going to go for the Iron Head. I'm more than happy to commit a shield here, as I'm going to be able to make it to 2 Breaking Swipes before they make their next move. I'm going for Breaking Swipe number 1 into the Dialga. No shields remaining for the opponent. They just have to take the damage. In the back, it's Groudon. I bank a Breaking Swipe for later, and I send in the Giratina Origin. 2 Precipice Blades is going to be enough to knock out here. I will be able to make it to a Shadow Ball before they get to Precipice Blades number 2. I'm going to overfarm and throw the move just before they're able to make their second charge move. The Shadow Ball connects. That does quite a lot of damage. Groudon farming up. A Fire Punch I don't believe is going to be enough to knock out here, so they're forced to go for the Precipice Blades. I can send in the Rhyperior, go for 1 Mud Slap and the Breaking Swipe, and with this energy advantage, it should allow me to outpace the Dialga. Let's see. In comes the Dialga, and Rhyperior is able to outpace. The Breaking Swipe picks up the knockout, and we take the win. All in all, I had an absolute blast getting to smack around some ZYGARDE with Tapu Bulu. As I mentioned at the start, Tapu Bulu struggles to see much of any meta relevance in the Open Master League. It just has a lot of Pokemon where it really has zero play. Going up against something like a Solgaleo, a Ho-Oh, a Dialga, it just really struggles in those matchups. So it's definitely more of a pick for fun. But in my particular ELO band, I was seeing a lot of ZYGARDE as I was ranked on the leaderboard, so being able to absolutely shut down ZYGARDE with a Pokemon like Tapu Bulu was definitely a worthwhile endeavor, even though I did go slightly negative with the team. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you're enjoying the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And a special thank you as always to our members here on YouTube. The support guys provide is sincerely appreciated, so thank you guys oh so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.